This is the image that Putin spent 2 years building toward. A city of 200,000 people 50 miles from the Ukrainian capital, hit by a weapon traveling at Mach 10, 10 times the speed of sound. Multiple warheads separating mid-flight, each one aimed independently, each one arriving faster than any alarm system on Earth can process. The city is called Biała. The missile is called the Oreshnik. And last night, in the early hours of May 24, 2026, Russia fired it at Ukraine for the third time. Not the first time. Not a test. The third time. And here is what nobody is fully processing yet. Ukraine cannot stop it. Not with Patriot. Not with anything it currently possesses. Not with anything its partners have sent. The experts say interception requires exo-atmospheric engagement. In space. Before the warheads separate, Ukraine does not have that capability. Nobody operating in this theater has that capability. And yet, what Zelensky said in the hours after the strike wasn't a request for sympathy. It wasn't a plea for more weapons from the usual list. What Zelensky said was the most strategically aggressive sentence any Ukrainian leader has uttered in 4 years of war. He looked at the missile that nobody can shoot down. He looked at the deployment of that same missile system sitting in Belarus, 700 kilometers from any interception dead zone, aimed at the heart of Eastern Europe. And he said it out loud on record into a live microphone. The Oreshnik in Belarus is a legitimate target. Let that land for a moment. Ukraine just told the world that Russia's nuclear-capable, theoretically unkillable missile system, currently deployed on the soil of a neighboring country, should be struck preemptively, not defensively, preemptively, before it fires again. That is not a military statement. That is an invitation to the most dangerous escalation this war has produced. And if you don't understand why that statement matters more than the 600 drones and 90 missiles that accompanied it last night, you don't understand what Russia just forced Ukraine to say. Stay with me, because what happened in the skies over Kyiv on the night of May 23rd carries a specific technical reality that changes the strategic calculus of this entire war. And the response it has triggered from Kyiv is either the most reckless or the most calculated thing any wartime leader has said in Europe since 1962. This is Monday, May 25th, 2026. Here is exactly what happened. Between 6 p.m. on Saturday and the early hours of Sunday morning, Russian forces launched what Ukraine's Air Force tallied as 690 aerial weapons aimed primarily at Kyiv. The breakdown matters. 600 attack drones, the Shahed variants, and their newer jet-powered derivatives. 2 Kh-47M2 Kinjal aeroballistic missiles. 3 Zircon anti-ship missiles repurposed against land targets. 30 Iskander-M and S-400 ballistic missiles. 54 cruise missiles of multiple types. And 1 Oreshnik, 1 RS-26 Rubezh, fired from the Kapustin Yar test range in Russia's Astrakhan Oblast, carrying multiple independently targetable warheads, each one separating at hypersonic speed during final approach, each one arriving at an angle and velocity that Ukraine's ground-based radar cannot reliably track simultaneously. Ukraine's air defenses destroyed 549 drones and 55 missiles. That is an extraordinary performance by any historical standard of air defense in this war. Ukrainian crews have been doing the impossible for months with Patriot interceptors running critically short, with systems designed for a different threat environment, adapted in real time to a drone-saturated battlefield. They destroyed nearly 90% of everything Russia sent at them last night. But they did not stop the Oreshnik. They have never stopped an Oreshnik. In 3 operational uses since November 2024, the missile has arrived unimpeded every single time. The Oreshnik hit Biała, a city of 200,000 people in the Kyiv region, 50 miles south of the capital. 4 people killed across the wider Kyiv Oblast, more than 83 wounded in the city alone, damage recorded in every district of Kyiv. A 5-story residential building in the Shevchenko district hit and on fire. Schools damaged while people sheltered inside. The windows of Ukraine's own foreign ministry building blown out. Smoke over the Chernobyl museum, which Zelensky visited in the morning standing in the ruins. And then Zelensky gave his statement. Here is what you need to understand about the technical reality of what Russia deployed last night, because the propaganda around the Oreshnik has been intense on both sides, and the truth is somewhere more unsettling than either narrative wants to admit. Vladimir Putin has claimed since November 2024 that the Oreshnik is unkillable, that it travels like a meteorite, that no air defense system on Earth can intercept it, that its conventional warhead delivers destruction comparable to a nuclear strike. He said this publicly. He said it repeatedly. He has treated the Oreshnik as his trump card, the weapon that ends the debate about Western air defense superiority, the thing that makes every Patriot battery and every F-16 deployment and every Western promise of "we will help Ukraine defend itself" feel hollow. Here is where Putin's claim intersects uncomfortably with what the Western analysts are actually saying. Matthew Saville, Director of Military Studies at the Royal United Services Institute in London, told the Associated Press after the January 2026 Lviv strike that even Patriot would struggle to intercept multiple warheads traveling at such velocity. The war zone noted that at Mach 10, the Oreshnik exceeds the reliable interception envelope of Patriot systems that have successfully engaged Russia's Kinzhal. The Defense Express analyst who reviewed the technical specifications said plainly that Ukraine currently, and in the foreseeable future, does not have the capability to intercept it. The interception window exists, but it requires exo-atmospheric engagement before the warheads separate. Before they are in space, that requires a system Ukraine does not have and its partners have not provided. Now, here is what the Western analysis also says that Putin's propaganda machine does not want you to hear. The Oreshnik is not a revolution. It is a modernized version of a Soviet missile program the USSR canceled in 1988. The RS-26, first developed in 2011, essentially a Cold War-era design given new guidance and multiple warheads. Ukraine's intelligence services examined fragments from the Dnipro strike in November 2024 and identified dated Soviet-era technology at its core. A U.S. official described it, after the same strike, as experimental and not a major battlefield game-changer. Russia is believed to have a limited number of them. Ukraine's own intelligence, relayed by Zelensky, calculated that 3 were originally produced from the first batch. 1 was used against Dnipro. 1 was destroyed in a Ukrainian intelligence operation inside Russia, a special security service raid on the launch infrastructure at Kapustin Yar in February 2026. That leaves from the original batch 1. Ukraine believes Russia has produced up to 3 more with production capacity for 6 annually. This is not an infinite weapon. This is not a strategic revolution. This is a missile Russia has to carefully ration, fired 3 times in 18 months against a country it has been trying to defeat for 4 years, each time at a high-visibility target, each time with an accompanying political statement from Putin about invincibility. The question is why Russia chose last night to use it again. The answer is not tactical, it is psychological. To understand what Russia is actually doing with the Oreshnik, you need to understand what Russia's strategic situation looks like from Moscow right now. And the picture from Moscow is not the picture state television is painting. The spring 2026 offensive has not broken Ukraine. Russia's rate of advance in the first 4 months of this year averages out, according to documented tracking, to roughly 350 square kilometers of captured territory. That sounds like something until you map it against the territory Russia is trying to take. The arithmetic runs toward a timeline measured not in months but in generations. Russia is not winning on the ground. Russia is winning slightly less slowly than last year. That is the total picture. Russia's casualties since the invasion crossed 1.355 million personnel in the last week. That is not a round propaganda number. That is Ukraine's Ministry of Defense count, updated daily, tracking dead and wounded across 4 years of combat. For scale, the United States lost 58,000 dead in Vietnam over a decade. Russia has lost multiples of that in 4 years against a neighbor. Putin's approval rating, tracked by his own state polling organizations, has dropped for 7 consecutive weeks. His economy minister told business leaders in April that the reserve funds have been largely used up. His central bank has slashed interest rates from 21% to 14.5% in a year, a panicked cut trying to stimulate an economy that military spending has warped into something that serves war production, but not the people who have to live in it. The Communist Party leader stood in the State Duma and used the word 1917. This is the strategic context in which Russia chose to fire its rarest, most symbolically loaded, technically unkillable missile at a city of 200,000 people on a Saturday night. Not because that missile changes the battle lines, not because Bila Tserkva holds a military target worth an Oreshnik, but because after 4 years of failure to break Ukraine conventionally, Russia wants Ukraine and Ukraine's partners to remember something. That there exists in Russian arsenals a category of weapon to which there is currently no answer. That the escalation ladder has rungs that Europe and America have not yet been willing to climb. That the path from conventional defeat to existential threat is a path Putin will walk if the conventional defeat becomes definitive enough. The Oreshnik is not a tactic, it is a message. It is Putin saying, before you celebrate how well Ukraine is doing, remember what I still have. And Zelensky's response to that message is the most dangerous sentence of the war. The Oreshnik in Belarus is a legitimate target. Understand what that means. Russia announced in December 2025 that the Oreshnik system had been placed on combat duty in Belarus, not aimed at Ukraine or not only at Ukraine. The system has a range of several thousand kilometers. From Belarus, with the approximately 700-kilometer dead zone where the missile cannot engage targets, the Oreshnik covers essentially every major city in Eastern Europe: Warsaw, Vilnius, Riga, Prague. It covers NATO territory from a non-NATO country hosting Russian nuclear-capable infrastructure by agreement with Lukashenko's government. When Zelensky says the Oreshnik in Belarus is a legitimate target, he is not speaking to Moscow. He is speaking to NATO. He is making an argument. That argument runs as follows. Russia has deployed a nuclear-capable weapon system, specifically designed to be uninterceptable, onto the territory of a third country, pointed at European capitals. The only defensive option available is to eliminate that system before it fires. Since there is no defensive intercept capability, the only remaining option is offensive strike. Ukraine is authorizing, in principle, the preemptive strike on that system as legally and militarily legitimate under the laws of armed conflict. That argument, if accepted by any NATO member, if repeated by any Western official, transforms the nature of this conflict. It is not a request for air defense. It is not a request for longer-range missiles. It is a request for someone to strike a nuclear-adjacent weapons deployment on Belarusian soil before the next Oreshnik is fired, before the one after that, before the escalation ladder reaches a rung that nobody can come back down from. NATO has not accepted this argument. No NATO member has publicly endorsed the logic Zelensky advanced. But the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, said European ministers will meet within days to discuss how to dial up the international pressure on Russia. France's Macron condemned the attack. Germany's Merz condemned the attack. These condemnations have been issued after every previous Russian strike on Ukrainian cities. They have not changed Russian behaviors. Zelensky knows this, which is why he is not asking for condemnations. He is asking for something that no one in the West has yet been willing to provide. Not weapons, not money, not sanctions. He is asking for a decision. Here is the decision that is actually on the table, even if nobody in Washington or Brussels will say it out loud. The Oreshnik represents a genuine strategic asymmetry. Russia has a weapon that can currently strike any target in Ukraine, and increasingly any target in Eastern Europe, with no existing defensive counter. The only counters are offensive. Either destroy the launch infrastructure inside Russia, which has already been demonstrated as possible by Ukraine's February 2026 raid on Kapustin Yar that eliminated one Oreshnik on the ground, or destroy the deployed systems in Belarus before they achieve their firing solution, or develop and deploy space-based or exo-atmospheric interception capability, which is a generational weapons development program, not a crisis response. The February 2026 raid matters enormously here. and it has been almost entirely overlooked in the coverage of last night's strike. Ukraine's security service conducted a successful operation against the Kapustin Yar range itself, the facility from which every Oreshnik has been launched, and destroyed at least one of the missiles on the ground. A missile that cannot be intercepted in flight can be destroyed before flight. Ukraine has proven this. And Zelensky is now publicly calling the deployed system in Belarus a legitimate target for exactly this reason. If you cannot stop it coming down, stop it before it goes up. The question is not whether that is militarily logical. It is militarily logical. The question is whether the political will exists anywhere in the Western alliance to authorize or support that logic before Russia fires again. And here is what makes this moment historically specific rather than just another terrible night in a 4-year war. The Oreshnik has now been used 3 times. The trajectory of its use tells a story. First use, November 2024, Dnipro, the industrial east, a military-adjacent target chosen to test the weapon and issue the first political signal. Second use, January 2026, Lviv, the western edge of Ukraine, 70 kilometers from the EU border, 70 kilometers from Poland, a NATO member state, selected to extend the psychological threat westward across a country whose western regions had previously felt relatively secure. Third use, May 2026, Bila Tserkva, 50 miles from Kyiv itself, in the middle of a 690 weapon salvo that hit every district of the capital. The geography is moving. Each deployment is closer to Kyiv. Each deployment is embedded in a larger, more complex saturation attack. Each deployment comes with a political statement from both sides. Russia says unkillable, escalation dominant, back down. Ukraine says legitimate target, we will not be deterred, someone must decide. If the pattern continues, the next Oreshnik is aimed at Kyiv itself. Putin has said as much. In 2024, when he announced the weapon, he publicly stated that government buildings in Kyiv could be targeted. He did not fire it at Kyiv then. He has been walking toward that decision in stages, each stage designed to test Western response. Each stage chosen because the previous stage produced condemnations, but not consequences. Zelensky's demand is for the world to break this pattern before it completes. His demand is addressed specifically to the United States, whose signals Russia pays attention to, which is what he said, verbatim, in his statement after last night's attack. A clear reaction from the world is needed, above all from the United States. Trump has not responded publicly as of this recording. The White House has not indicated what, if any, U.S. response is being prepared. The administration that loosened some sanctions on Russian oil exports in recent weeks to address energy market shortfalls from the Iran conflict is now being asked by the president of the country it has spent hundreds of billions supporting to send a signal that Russia will feel before the next unkillable missile departs Kapustin Yar. Here is the final frame to take with you. Putin's calculation with the Oreshnik is the same calculation Russia has made at every escalation threshold of this war. That the West will absorb the provocation, issue condemnations, provide slightly more support to Ukraine, and ultimately not cross the line that makes Russia's strategic position untenable. He has been right about this repeatedly. The Kerch Bridge strike, the attacks on nuclear plant infrastructure, the Kinzhal strikes on Kyiv, the Lviv Oreshnik strike 70 kilometers from Poland. Each time the line was moved, not crossed. The difference now is that Zelensky is not asking the West to cross the line. He is asking the West to recognize that the line has already been crossed. That a nuclear-capable system deployed in Belarus, fired 3 times from Russian territory at Ukrainian cities with no existing counter, is not a line to be respected. It is a problem to be solved, and the only people capable of solving it are the ones currently choosing not to. If the West decides that's not their problem, if the response to last night is another round of condemnations and another promise of more Patriot interceptors that cannot catch what's coming, then the 4th Oreshnik will land somewhere, and the 5th. And the pattern Zelensky is trying to break will complete itself exactly as Russia designed it. And if the West decides that Zelensky is right, that the deployed system is a legitimate target, that the logic of preemption is sound, that the alternative is accepting a permanent, unkillable, escalation-dominant threat over every major city in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Then the next chapter of this war is not written yet. But its first sentence starts in Belarus, and it starts soon. Subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell because in the next 72 hours, 3 things will tell you everything about where this goes. First, whether Trump responds to Zelensky's direct appeal, the one specifically addressed to him, the one that calls for the United States, whose signals Russia pays attention to send a signal Russia will actually feel. Second, whether the EU foreign ministers meeting Callas has called produces anything beyond a joint statement of condemnation. And third, whether Russia fires the Oreshnik again because the frequency of use is accelerating. From November 2024 to January 2026 to May 2026, the gaps are shortening and the targeting is moving closer to the capital. The unkillable missile has been fired 3 times. Zelensky has named the one that matters most. It is sitting in Belarus right now, and the world has not yet decided whether to do anything about it before it fires. We will be here when it does.